started here. Just to give you a list for what we intend to discuss tonight. First, we have a presentation from the Office of Neighborhood Strategies within the Housing and Preservation Department. So I'll just introduce them first, and then they'll provide their presentation and opportunity for questions. After that, we're going to have a presentation from City Planning. That will be David Weissglass, Associate Borough Planner at New York City Department of City Planning, who will be our liaison to this board for all things city planning. And again, he'll have a presentation for us, and we'll have some time for questions and answers. And then finally, at the very end, and this is particularly for committee members, since this is our first meeting, we'd like to take the opportunity for a few minutes just to talk about organizational type items and sort of talk about the scope of this committee and things that we all as a committee are interested in, and things that we may want for future programs. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started with our first agenda item. This evening we have, and are proud to have, Charlisa Lanzot, again from the Office of Neighborhood Strategies from HPD. I understand there are a few other representatives, and so Ms. Lanzot, please take the opportunity to introduce your colleagues as well who are here this evening. And tonight we have a presentation on housing code complaints and resources, just to give us an overview on things to think about for our district. So I'll turn it over at this point to Ms. Lanzot. I see that you're on. So by all means, welcome, and we look forward to your presentation. Just making sure that she is, okay, here we go.
I believe you are muted. We've got your screen, but not your sound.
Sorry.
You're good now. Thank you.
Good evening. Sorry about that.
I didn't realize. Thank you.
You didn't realize either, right? Good evening, everyone. My name is Charlisa Lanzot. I'm from HPD. And yes, we are part of the Neighborhood Stabilization Division. But first and foremost, we're the NEO team, which stands for Neighborhood Education and Outreach. And our team basically goes out and lets people know about all the things that HPD, all the resources that HPD has to provide. We field questions from the public. We try to help navigate the bureaucracy and kind of cut through some of the red tape to help people get answers that they need if they're confused by the hierarchy or who they should reach and so forth and so on. So without further ado, again, my name is Charlisa Lanzot. I have two of my colleagues on board with me, Isabelina Sosa, who will be basically doing the presentation and kind of forwarding the presentation. She's a little shy, she won't speak, but she'll be behind the scenes. And along with Elaine Garcia, who's also there for support. So thank you again, Brooklyn Community Board 14. Next slide, Isabelina. I just want to talk a little bit about HPD. A lot of people, they really don't even know what our agency does. A lot of people just tend to think about NYCHA, and they don't really think about there is a housing preservation and development organization within the city that was established in 1978. And they established this agency to promote quality and affordability of the city's housing, and to also strengthen and make communities more diverse. HPD preserves affordable housing and also protects tenants. The preserving of affordable housing comes through programs which will help, like, owners, for instance, be able to do repairs with through grants or no interest loans. It gives you like a set of tools, and it also will, we also offer classes and all type of supports for owners. And on the tenant side, HPD offers assistance with them maybe finding affordable housing or building affordable housing. Also making tenants know about their rights. What are your entitlements as a tenant? What are your responsibilities as an owner? And when both parties understand their parts and what they should be doing, we should be able to have viable communities. So that's basically what we try to do for the most part. Next slide. Isabelina? Okay. Now that we talked a little bit about the background of HPD, let's talk about some of the nuts and bolts. Okay, what are some of the things we actually do? HPD does issue code violations, but these violations are basically for the safety of those who live in homes, those who live in apartments. We also require that owners register their properties. And the importance of this is for us to be able to contact the owner if anything happens. And I'm going to give an example. During Hurricane Sandy, a lot of owners had major disasters, had a lot of things happen to their homes, and they may not have even lived in their homes. So they may have been living in Florida, they might have been living in other parts of the country, and HPD did not even know how to contact the owner. So in cases like this, it's really important because when HPD sent inspectors out, or they sent people out to be able to try to tell you, like, how could you get your home repaired? You know, what do I do next? You know, I have safety issues here. Actually, you know, there's my heat systems are not working and things like that. We didn't even know who. It was a whole big project the agency had to go through to try to contact owners. So that's one reason why it's very important to register your property. HPD also offers housing education courses. These courses are administered through NEO, my team. And we'll talk more about those a little bit later in the presentation. As I mentioned, we have programs for owners. We're responsible for also making sure that lead paint issues are addressed for people that have children that live in apartments or homes where children are 6 years or under age, and require window guards for anyone that has children that come to visit or live in the home that are 11 years or younger. And then again, as everybody is mostly aware of, HPD also has affordable housing opportunities. If you go to our website, we actually have a Housing Connect lottery team that, and on the website, all the developments that come through HPD with affordable housing apartments available, these are posted every day on the website, and you can sign up for them, put your name on them, and if you're eligible, you may be able to get in one of these apartments. Next slide. I said a lot about the agency as a whole, but I would like to also give my team a shout out. We're very small, but we're very mighty. We offer resources to empower the community, and the resources that we offer are fairs. Something similar to what we're doing tonight, but we actually help put together fairs with tenant organizations, with community members, tenants associations, with elected officials. And these resource fairs are tenant resource fairs where we give tenants the opportunity to address their housing concerns. Things like, okay, I have no heat and hot water. I don't know what to do. You know, I can't pay my rent. I'm behind in my rent. Are there any resources that can help me with that? And me and my landlord just don't get along. He wants me out. He's harassing me. And those are the types of resources that we provide at these events. And we set them up with the help. We usually partner with someone. We set them up, and now we're doing them virtually. We used to do them in person. Maybe if this pandemic ever gets to the point that we can do face to face, we will at that point do that. It's the same thing with owner resource fairs, but they're more geared towards owners. So owners would need information basically about code violations, like we'll be talking about tonight, property tax exemptions, foreclosure prevention, building permits. And in cases like that, we may not be able to give you specifics. So we will invite agencies that can talk to those subjects specifically. For instance, I could not tell you about tax exemptions. I'm not an expert in that. I couldn't tell you how your property is assessed, but we would invite DOF, the Department of Finance, and we would invite all these organizations there at all these resource fairs to be able to speak to their specific topics. Next. We do property owner clinics, which is similar to an owner's clinic, a resource fair, but it's a little bit different. We've held those off lately because of the pandemic, but we plan on trying to gear them up maybe by the summer or by the fall again. These are much more intimate resource fairs where we only may have 3 agencies or 4 agencies. DEP, where people complain about their water bills all the time. DOF, where people are concerned about taxes. We would have CNYCN, which is the Center of New York City Neighborhoods. They talk about grants and low interest loans for energy efficiency upgrades. And that way, people can come and have like a one-on-one conversation, bring paperwork in and talk to these people, on that given night. We also have what we call community engagement events, which is similar, I guess, more similar to what we're doing tonight, where someone will invite HPD to come out, but it's different in the sense that it's more like a tabling event. So you might be invited to if any of you have let's say a community event, block party, or something in the community like that. HPD will, people invite HPD to come out to these outdoor events, set up tables. They have tables for us. We set everything up. We have gamuts of information out there. We have giveaways and all that type of stuff. And we'll be able to give you general information at that point. And last but not least, NEO also does housing resource fairs, which is just a general resource fair, where we'll have tenant information and owners information in the same event. And we'll have tenants and owners at the same meeting and giving out resources to both. Next, please. Another thing that the neighborhood education and outreach unit does is we offer free classes, and they are on our website. And Elaine will probably pull it in the chat already. These are free. If you go to our website, hpd.nyc.gov, check under events on our events page. At any given time, you can join any of these classes for free. A lot of people don't know about them. It's very little things that we can say are free today, but just check it out. The topics that are covered, like financing capital improvements. So our preservation finance team actually will sit down and talk about all the finance options that the city has for owners that are ministered through HPD. We also have a class that's Introduction to Rent Regulations in Housing Court. So a lot of people who don't understand how rent regulations work, what are you entitled to? Why do I have these increases? I don't understand why. We will actually go through all of that. And what do you do in housing court? Why do I have to even bring somebody to housing court? What happens in housing court? We actually have housing court answers on the line to deal with that. And I won't go through the entire thing, but you can see we have it on several. Pest management. There's a huge rodent infestation in New York City right now. You might be interested on, what do I need to do? How do we work on this rodent issue? Excellent. DOH comes to this, and they do a whole program on talk about how to try to alleviate that issue. Bed bugs, rodents, roaches, all the typical NYC things that we come across. And then last but not least, we do an introduction to residential property management course that is headed by Elaine Garcia, and we usually support her. And I'm an owner, I have property. I'm not quite sure what to do. I want to rent. I want to actually have tenants. How do I manage my property? It's like a one-on-one class on how to do that. So please, because if I just say, spread the word, have people just go to the website and check it out, the more the merrier. As anything, we work for the government, and if people don't attend the classes, the next thing you know, that might be one of the things that they may cut in the budget. So we would like to continue to have these classes well attended. Next page. Okay, so we're going to start with tenants and how do I file a complaint? What happens? I have a problem. There's no heat and hot water, or my landlord hasn't fixed that leaky faucet. There's a leak in the ceiling, all of these types of things. What do I do? The first thing you should do is call 311. We also have a 311 online. If those who don't want to speak to anyone, you can do it online as well. It's open every day, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Once you put in your complaint, HPD will send out a notification or call to the registered owner. Once that call comes out to the registered owner, a call may also be made to the tenant to confirm whether the condition has been corrected since the last time maybe the complaint was put in. Person could have called in the complaint yesterday or 2 days ago. It's been corrected since then. So they don't want to send an inspector out and it's already been taken care of. So you may get a call. If there's no confirmation that the correction was made, an inspector will be dispatched. They will go out, look and inspect everything. And then at that point, they will issue a violation. I want to strongly encourage that when you call 311, always get a complaint number. You will be given a number that's only associated with your call. That number is the tracking number for you, so that if someone doesn't show up or there is some type of issue, you can always go refer back to that complaint number. When an inspector goes out, he's going to look at 9 different other safety issues besides the issue you may have called about. He's going to look for smoke detectors. He's going to look for carbon monoxide detectors. He's going to see if there are any illegal gates on the windows. He's going to look to see if there are locks on exit doors. He's also going to check to see if he sees children there and there are no window guards on the windows. He's going to look for self-closing dwelling unit doors that close on their own. And due to that big fire in the Bronx, that's a big thing now. And he's going to look for peeling paint. I see children around. It looks like paint is peeling here. I want to find out what's going on. And they will issue, even though they didn't come there for those things, they will issue violations if they see those things. Next page, please. So if they issue a violation, an owner is given time to make corrections. And it depends on the severity of the violation. Of course, if you have no heat and it's 0 degrees outside, that's something that has to be done immediately. That's considered severe, like double severe. So they would expect that to be like fixed within 24 hours. And if not, what may happen is HPD may actually send out a team to do an emergency repair, and then the owner will be responsible for making those, for paying the city back for them having to make that repair for them. Hopefully that's not the case, but the way it normally works is once the violation is issued, they can always check your violations to see what the statuses are on HPD online. And HPD sends out a notice of the violation directly to the owner or the property manager. Then once that happens, they're responsible for making the correction. If the correction is not made within that time and an inspector goes back out, more fines and everything are put on the owner. So it's best for the owner to try to do those within the required time. And if you find that, like if an owner finds that they're having difficulty getting something done or there was a miscommunication, you could always call one of our site offices. They're listed in our ABCs online, or they're listed right online. Just go to code or violations. Once you query it in our portal, and it'll tell you all of that, who you can contact and who you can speak to. And as you know, most people know, not everyone, there are three classes of violations: A, B, and C violations. A violations are non-hazardous, and you have about 90 days to correct those. B violations are considered hazardous. You have 30 days. C violations, as you can see here, which are lead-based paint, window guards, mold, all of those, you have 21 days to try to do something about that. Heat and hot water, as I said, immediately. And then there are other types of hazardous C violations that I'm not quite aware of, but that will be explained online. And when the owner receives the violation, you will see what is categorized as anyway and what the violation is for. Once a violation has been corrected, it's not HPD's responsibility to go back out and check. It's the owner's responsibility to make sure that they come back and let HPD know that the violation has been corrected. And this is done through a certification process. The certification process can actually be done online through e-certification, or you can do it by completing the violation documents that are mailed to the owner. So upon the notice of violation, which tells you how long you have to correct the violation, you will also be sent, you'll also send paperwork that you can fill out, and that can be, that would be justification that the corrections were made. Failure to correct violations can result in civil penalties imposed by the housing court. And, you know, the more penalties, the more difficult it is for people to get back on their feet. So it's best to address these as soon as possible. Next page, please. Okay. I'm going to now talk about our New York City Housing Resource Center portal. HPD just recently launched a new resource center portal to make it more user-friendly. And you can go to hpd.nyc.gov, and it'll automatically take you basically to the housing portal. And the housing portal has a line there, an area there, where you can just type in whatever topic it is that you want to know about. If it's affordable housing, it's a code violations, or whatever it is. Then you'll see, once you do that, a whole host of resources will pop up or populate right underneath that. You click on that and you're able to go from there. You know, the world is wide open at that point, because it'll start to send you not only to HPD sites, but other sites that are affiliated with housing. So the types of things that you can query and find on this port, you can find out about eviction or harassment support. I'm behind in my rent. How do I get help with that? Rental housing support. You can find out how, like I just said, how to manage a residential property, how to report a housing maintenance complaint, how to correct a complaint, a violation, right? Financial resources, like I just mentioned, through our preservation finance team. And of course, the thing that most people are interested in is the housing lotteries, which is the affordable housing opportunities that we have that are available. And that particular site is great because you can go on that site and actually set up a profile with all your eligibility criteria and everything. How much do I make? You know, it's, you know, what type, where do I want to live? I only want to live in Brooklyn. I don't want to live in the Bronx. And actually, you will start to get offers or see the offers that are in those particular areas of interest and would fall within your eligibility criteria. And then you would just click on that, because now you have all your information in, and that would kind of start the ball with you actually applying to affordable housing. So they really made it easy. Just go and check it out. They really worked hard on it. I think they did a pretty good job. Next page, please. I just talked about the portal. I think I covered everything, but I just want to let you know it's only the 5 boroughs. Visit the site and easily apply. Like I said, it's a new, it's relatively a new site. So if you're on the old HPD portal, let's say a year ago, you signed up on this affordable housing portal, opportunities portal, don't go by that anymore. You have to go in and you have to re-sign on the new portal. Everything with the old portal doesn't exist anymore. They phased in the new portal. So you would have to go in, start a new account, put in all your information, and begin from there. Next page, please. We also have a first-time home buyers down payment assistance program, which you can also find on our site. And this program is to help first-time home buyers with their down payment. And it's for homes that are 1 to 4 units. It also includes cooperatives, and it also includes condominiums within the 5 boroughs. You can get a forgivable loan if you're eligible up to $100,000. And it goes up to the 80% AMI. So just go in and kind of mess around and check that out. If you have friends that are looking for homes, they don't want to leave New York City. You know, I think it's a great thing. They have the money there, the funding is there. They just, like I said, just revamped all the eligibility requirements to include people at a high income status. So you can go to our HPD NYC website again, .gov, and check that out as well. Next page. And this is last but not least, I'm going to wrap it up by saying 311 is your friend. 311 is your friend. When you don't know where to go, you're not sure, call 311. I'm not going to say they're always right, but most of the time they're right. So if you want information about like coronavirus and what's going on now, because things keep changing every day, they'll link you to someone maybe in the Department of Health that can explain that to you. If you have a senior that you know that needs meals delivered to them, this is the place you can go. Hra One-Shot Deals, I just mentioned that. People that are behind in their rent may be actually eligible for a one-shot deal. This helps owners and it helps tenants. It helps the tenant be able to stay in where they live, and it helps the owner receive their rent. People that might be struggling paying for food right now. Due to the pandemic, a lot of people were laid off or lost their jobs. You can find out about SNAP. So we always kind of push that, because even though we're a housing agency, without housing, nobody is stable. And we find that a lot of people that are unstable have to get other resources other than just housing resources. So we push 311 and we deal with Hra and a lot of other organizations. They partner with us on a lot of these resource fairs to help get information out. And that's about it. Does anyone have any questions?
Yeah, we will take questions at this point. If anyone does have a question, just ask for anyone to use the raised hand function, and then we'll walk through it. First off, thank you so much for the presentation, Ms. Lanzot, and also to Ms. Sosa, Ms. Garcia, for your input as well. Just very informative, and it looks like we do have a few questions, so I'll just start at the top here. Melissa Minich, please ask your question.
Thank you for all of this. This was very insightful and helpful. And I've worked in affordable housing for many years, and We definitely appreciate all that your department does, and the new and revamped Housing Connect is fantastic. So thank you very much for that. Um, Actually, I have a question. Are there any plans to create a new Michelama Connect? And I guess to revamp the Michelama sites along with the rest, given that that still, when you follow those links, they still kind of go to an outdated part of HPD's sites.
That's difficult for me to answer because that's not under us. But you know what? I will take that back to the Michelama team to find out if they are working on something. It's a possibility that they could be. But you know, Michelamas are not just administered through HPD. Most Michelamas are state Michelamas. So that would actually, you know how bureaucracy works, right? We work for the city and then there's the state Michelamas that I definitely would not be able to answer anything on. But Isabel and Elaine will note that, and I'll try to find out for you. I can go right to them and speak to them about it and see. If
Thank
you
you.
don't, could you
You can just
send
send the information to the community board and we'll pass
right,
it on from
and you
there.
could pass it on to us, right?
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we have another question from co-chair Charlisa Lanzot.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And thank you, Charlisa, Isabelina, and Elaine for that great presentation. I just had a couple of, I guess, questions slash clarifications that I'd like to get from you. First, in terms of registration with HPD, 1 and 2 family homes, do they need to register as well? Or
They don't, not
right.
necessarily,
Okay.
but we strongly suggest that you do. And if I'm incorrect, Elaine, you let me know because Elaine teaches the property management courses.
Only time you have to register your property for 1 and 2 if you're not living there, if you're renting it out. That's
If you're
the only
renting it
time
out.
you have to register as a 1 and 2 property owner.
Okay.
But right.
Okay, but
Like I said,
otherwise,
you
if
don't
you're
have to. There's no law, like she said, but a lot of times we strongly suggest that people do so that there's some type of contact information. Registration is only $13 for the year. It's a very, very, very small fee. And you know, just dealing with things in the past, I just think it would be good for HPD to have it on record as to who the owner is, and basically not even necessarily who the owner is, but who to contact if anything ever occurs.
Mhm.
But
Well,
that's your choice.
but that would also be like information that you can, I guess, relatively easily get from like Department of Finance as well, right? Like, or
You can, but you can,
relatively easily get.
you can,
Well,
you can.
there's also the benefit of registering your property is also if when you're going to take a tenant, if you have a renter and you're going to take a tenant to court, usually the court will want you to have registration. Sometimes they kick it out if your building is not registered, your house is not registered.
Okay. Okay. And I also wanted to know, does HPD have specific help for dealing with violations? Um, the different violations that a registered property can get. Do you have specific help that owners can?
Okay, if you've been issued violations, we have what I call our DPM office. And I use the acronym so much, I have to actually think about what DPMs. Department of Property Management. At each site office, they have a unit there that can sit down with you. You can bring your paperwork in. They also have a unit that's part of the code enforcement unit also, what they call the inquiries. If you have inquiries about violations and you just want to talk to them about the violations generally. And they also have our DPM office. that also will sit down with you and try to work through it if you're having some type of financial distress and you think that it'll be difficult to pay off these violations, trying to give you some avenues and things that you could work with to help you. Since you're in Brooklyn, I will, Isabelina or Elaine can put it in the chat. We have 2 Brooklyn offices, and I think they just opened up where you can come in 1 night a week or 2 nights a week. But there's a phone number. She will post that for you. And that's one way that you could do it.
Okay. Okay. And I just want to get, I guess, a little bit of a clarification for people who may not know. So HPD is specifically deals with privately owned properties, right? So that like issues with NYCHA housing would not fall under HPD. That would be a separate situation. So like if a tenant has a problem and they live in a NYCHA sponsored housing, they wouldn't call HPD. They wouldn't contact HPD.
No, they can for a heat and hot water violation, you can, because that's usually people do. They'll just call 311, because that's something that's kind of urgent. But basically, no, NYCHA has their own, they're a totally separate entity. They're not part of HPD. They have their own property managers, and they have their own, people that are supposed to address repair issues. So HPD is a total separate agency from NYCHA.
Okay. And the last thing that I was curious about, and I sort of feel like I have a feeling about how you're going to answer, but what if somebody, an owner, feels like an inspector gave them a class B violation that has to be cured in like 24 hours? I don't remember if a class B is 24 hours or not, but uh, if a property owner did get a violation and they felt like, well, no, this is not, this serious, where I have to cure this in 24 hours or, within like 3 days or something like that. Is there any kind of like, how does a property owner like contest that before the deadline is due?
I don't know how you would contest what he wrote, but there is once a violation is issued, at this point, I think the best thing would do if an owner did not agree with that particular violation or they thought that that violation did not exist, they have to call the office and speak to somebody. Or what I just said, you have to go down there with your paperwork. You have to have proof. You can't just say, I don't agree with this because I just don't think that I should get this. You actually have to have proof. If you can go down there with your proof, if you can speak to someone, then that violation may be able to be taken off. But to be honest with you, I don't know if like you disputing what the class of the violation is. They have specific categories that they go by.
Yeah.
As far as what category of specific violation falls under. And each category gives you that number of days to make that correction. That cannot be changed. But if you feel that maybe a violation shouldn't have been given to you, or that was something that was corrected, or you have pictures, you have proof, he can come back out and look at it. At that point, I would suggest that you do what I told you to do, that you would speak to someone directly and have them address it.
Okay.
And
That's
if
all
there's
the
anything,
questions.
Elaine, you think I could add to that, please let me know. Because Elaine deals with the classes and the code inspectors and stuff all the time with the classes. And I'm sure this is a question she may have heard before.
No, the only thing, if it's given usually in what you're talking about is really a C, violations. And those are the serious violations. Those have to be cured within that specific time period. There's no change, there's no changing. And that also includes what happened with in the Bronx with that fire, the closing door. That's a C violation. That should have been, so no, they cannot change time. You have to cure it or answer it within the time period. You have to answer within the time period with proof.
Right. Proof is the key.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's all the questions that I have. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I just had one question as well. When you were discussing the scope of inspections when inspectors come out on behalf of HPD, I was wondering about this. Is there any crossover with what the HPD inspectors do with what DOB inspectors do? Is there some crossover there, or are there distinct functions that inspectors, they go out for DOB have versus HPD?
There are different violations that are issued through DOB and HPD.
Okay.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, no, please.
Okay. So HPD's violations are more, well, I won't say that DOBs are not safety issues either. They are. But DOB deals more with structural type stuff. For instance, someone's out there and they're building a building and the scaffolding is about to fall off, or they didn't properly put the scaffolding up, or there's some type of specific, they're doing work too late at night. Let me think of some of the things that they may have. They have to vacate the building because the building is unsafe. They went out to the building and they see that the actual structure is leaning to one side and it's dangerous and they have to remove people. Those are the types of violations that DOB
Elevator violations.
Right.
Okay. That makes sense.
Right. Those are the types of things. They may not do like window guards or things like that. HPD does, lead violations, things like that. But it's more geared to those types of violations. And I'm trying to think of something to like give you an example.
No, it makes sense.
Okay.
I understand. It's
All
sort of
right.
like internal, more specific to the actual habitability of a unit versus the building overall. Okay.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. I gotcha. All right. Very good.
I do want to give the co-chairs a quick time check. We're at 7:14.
Okay. So, all right. So I'll take one more question. How about that? I see. I think Carl came up first. So Carl, if you'd like to ask your question, and then perhaps we'll end the discussion there.
Sure. Thank you very much for that, Co-Chair Alvarez. So HPD, thank you for the presentation. It was very insightful. And so the question I have is basically in terms of affordable housing. So does this mean that, HPD is working with DOB and the developers, right? Just because it's a big process with many, cooks in the kitchen. And so I had no idea that HPD had an affordable kind of housing arm, for lack of a better term. And so I'm just wondering, when I hear about AMI being set and I see buildings coming up either as of right or not, whether they're homes or not, does HPD play a role in this as well? Or is it just with existing stock but not net new?
Okay, so this is how it works with the affordable housing. We actually oversee the management to make sure that it's fair and equitable, right? To make sure that somebody really is eligible, that someone's not skipping someone else in the process. Those are the types of things where HPD becomes involved with the affordable housing. So, and a lot of times these housing opportunities that you're going to see online are new developments that HPD actually work with developers that put in tax credits, right? In lieu of them giving a certain number of affordable housings in these new developments. We oversee that whole affordable housing process. Okay, we're not the management company. There's usually a management company, but we oversee the process. We deal with the management companies to make sure that they're following the rules and regulations that they're supposed to follow. Okay, if any complaints come in, they come into HPD. HPD may address those complaints that people have with the management company. So that's kind of how we're involved in all the development part, that's going out to the site, finding the site, doing these ULURPs, where they're making sure that, you know, they looked at the area and make sure that it's not having an impact on the environment, and they do all these environmental studies. We're involved in all of that process, the brick and mortar and getting the developer that actually going to build the building and everything. There's a whole process that's through an RFP process where people bid, they're selected, and that's how that works. And then once the building is built, okay, how are we going to get the people in there, and how are we going to choose the people? Right? What are the eligibility requirements are going to be for that neighborhood? That's all discussed when all of this is being put together in a big, nice, big package. Once the bow is put on the package and we can unwrap it and start giving out the gifts, we got to make sure the people that deserve the gifts get the gifts. So HPD's the people that kind of look over that. And I hope that I explained that well enough, but I tried to wrap it up quick.
You did. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry. I do see one more question. If it's a quick question, maybe we can ask it, Darlene Bowers, and then we'll wrap it there.
Yes, it's a quick question. If you know of a building that has people living in their basement or cellar, is that a HPD or a DOB question problem?
HPD does a lot of that. HPD does a lot of that.
Okay.
Unfortunately, there's a whole big thing about, you know, basement apartments, and the mayor's addressing that because people don't have anywhere to live. And it's coming to the point that, you know, people live in basements, and they're trying to see if they could come up with a program to legalize basement living. But at this point, it's not legal. You have to have, you know, forms of egress, as we know, you know, at least 2 forms of egress. And it's become a big thing, but that's an HPD does issue violations for basement apartments.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you. All right. So again, we thank you so much for coming in this evening. Thanks for explaining a number of things, and I thank you for your information that you've left with us for any follow-up. So again, really appreciate your time this evening.
And thank you. I just want to give one more shout out to my NEO team. And at any time you can send questions directly to NEO, NEO at hpd.nyc.gov. So if something comes up later that you just want to answer, we can kind of reach out to whoever can give you the answer, and hopefully it can be addressed. I see Isabelina put it in the chat as well.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you, and good night.
And we're going to head out. Have a good evening.
You too.
Good night.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on now to our next, we'll go right into our next item, and I'm going to turn it over to Talisha to introduce our next speaker.
Thanks, Greg. So our next speaker is David Weissglass, who is an associate borough planner at the Brooklyn office of the New York City Department of City Planning. He's going to give us a presentation about city planning, zoning, and development. So David, you can go ahead and get started.
Great. Thank you, Talisha. I'm very happy to be here. I don't think I've met most of you before, so quick introduction. Again, my name is David. I'm relatively new still within the Brooklyn office of the Department of City Planning. But, you know, quick background on me. I'm from New Jersey, born and raised. I went to college in LA, I worked for the San Francisco Planning Department for a while, but I am absolutely thrilled to be back in the East Coast. New York is the reason I fell in love with city planning in the first place. The old joke is my family is that my parents, both of whom lived in New York for a long time, met in New York, got married as New York residents, moved to the suburbs to have kids, and I never forgave them. So I'm thrilled to be in New York. I'm thrilled to be working for New York, thrilled to be working for the people of New York. And I'm just going to give a really short presentation. I know people are tired. City planning deals with much more than zoning. Zoning is what we hear about all the time, and obviously affects development all over, the district, all over the city. So this is just going to be a basic 101 on zoning. Not going to go that much into ULURP processes, not going to go that much into the history of zoning, which is fascinating and awesome, and I'd love to talk more about it in the future. But this is kind of just like a very, very high level 101, even pre-101, on just kind of the difference between as of right development and different kinds of land use actions, and kind of the theory behind zoning, rather than the actual, practice of it, kind of how New York is set up. So let me share my screen real quick, and I can get started. All right. Let me see if I can get this to be full screen. Okay. All right, can everyone see my screen? All right, sounds good. So again, 101 on zoning, just going to be about the theory of zoning and kind of how New York is set up. I know a lot of y'all know this already, but just a general overview, and obviously happy to answer questions hereafter, and I'll put my contact info in the chat for anyone to contact me afterwards. All right, so what is zoning? Zoning basically regulates use in space. So private property in this country, obviously private property is very sacred in the US, and at the same time, regulation of what owners can do on their private property is as old as this country itself. So we're always kind of fighting that battle. It regulates what can be built on your property, how much can be built, where buildings and uses can be constructed. So again, use in space. Residential, zones don't allow for bars, for restaurants, because that's not where they should be. It doesn't allow for industrial sites because it doesn't make sense to mix those uses in most cases. And space, whether that's space on the ground, how big your setbacks need to be, how big your rear yard needs to be, how big your side yard needs to be, and also space includes the space above your land, how tall your building can be, how much that needs to be set back. It provides certainty not only for owners of properties to know what they can build on their own property, but it also provides certainty to everybody who rents, lives, works in the area to know what they can expect, or at least the limits of what they can expect in their area given the different zoning. And it also provides a framework for appropriate growth, not only within a block, but also a neighborhood, and also helps to solidify a neighborhood's place within the entire city. New York is a little bit unique in that we don't have what's called comprehensive planning, and I'm happy to go into more detail about that at a later date. But at the same time, we understand that no neighborhoods have walls around them, and every neighborhood kind of plays a role in the city as a whole. Zoning exists to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of the users of the city, and we've bolded and underlined those words for good reason. That is law. If the department or if a government agency anywhere in the country, including in New York, basically does something that or follows some sort of zoning or planning guideline or action that does not explicitly protect the public health, safety, or welfare of all the users of the city, then the city can actually get sued for that. So it is a requirement that we have to defend the actions that we take as a city. The city council has to be able to defend the actions legally in court, that it exists to protect public health, safety, and welfare. There's slides I've taken out of this from previous ones about the history. Obviously, tenement laws play a huge role in this, and overcrowding of different apartments plays a role. And so that's basically some background here. City charter gives authority to the planning departments. We study different neighborhoods, different areas, different corridors, different properties. We create zoning rules, we modify zoning rules, and we recommend changes, either changes to the zoning map, which I can show you how to go through in a bit, or changes to the zoning resolution itself, which are the rules of zoning. But we don't actually interpret those and enforce them in specific developments. If you own a property, you need to apply for a building permit, and you need to, have your architect do all those plans and get them very specific. And the planning department will decide what your zoning is well before you draw up those plans. But the building department is actually the one that makes sure that your plans meet the zoning that NYC Planning has actually made. So they are the ones that interpret and enforce the specific rules of the zoning regulations. They're the experts there. We have a couple experts in DCP, obviously. If we're making the zoning and changing the zoning sometimes, obviously we need to have experts there, but we're not the ones that actually enforce the regulations in specific developments. And of course, the Board of Standards and Appeals grants variances and different zoning special permits for hardships or unique sites. Here's what happens at the bottom in this box that I want to emphasize is that development that happens in according with zoning and the building code is called as of right. And this is a term that planners, across the country use. As of right means that you are following the rules. Ergo, no special land use action or what we tend to call discretionary review is actually required. The theory being that if we are zoning a certain area for this kind of height, this kind of bulk of a building, we're saying you can build to this high, you can build with this kind of backyard, and you can build this use. If a property owner has a vacant lot and says, okay, I'm going to follow those rules, then by the theory of zoning, that's cool. That's great. And that's okay. So there are others where a property owner will come in and say, you know what I want to build, I can't follow those rules. What I want to build is actually taller than what the rules allow. It's a different use than what the rules allow. In certain situations, that's because that owner owns a really unique site. It could be on a really sloped area, or maybe it's a strangely shaped lot. And in that case, as we see on the right, you can apply for a variance. But in certain cases, it's just because the owner kind of wants to do something different. And sometimes that leads to a rezoning. And of course, many of you have seen rezoning applications. Those are the ones that require significant public review in the Uniform Land Use Review Procedure, or ULURP, which is really fun to say. And I would argue fun to get involved with. All right, so let's dig into this a little bit. On the top here is an image, and on the bottom is a table that is found in the most recent zoning handbook. The zoning resolution itself, where the actual text of the zoning is written. I mean, obviously it's all online now, but it is convoluted and complex, and it's crazy. But the zoning handbook basically intends to crystallize things into much simpler ideas, and here's an example of what we see here. So in 1961, basically the city totally redid its zoning and rezoned almost the entire city and formulated different zoning districts. Again, not getting too much into the history of zoning here, happy to come back and do that at a later time. But for instance, we have R5, which is a non-contextual zoning district. I'll explain contextual and non-contextual in a minute. But R5 is one of the districts that was introduced in 1961. And as you'll see, there's a lot of R5 districts in Brooklyn, and specifically a lot of R5 in CB14 itself. So R5, you can look at some of the drawings here, right? The darker buildings that are a little bit shaded up here at the top, those are meant to show kind of what typically exists in that block. And then the white buildings, as well as this kind of envelope that isn't filled in, intend to show the kind of development that could be built under these regulations. Here you see they generally conform to the height that's typically found in the neighborhood. In 1961, the zoning tended to respond to different neighborhoods, right? We're not just, in 1961, the city was not a blank slate, it was far from it. So the zoning responded to what was existing in those neighborhoods. So here in the handbook, you can see the specifics of how big your front yard needs to be as a single and two family zone, how big it needs to be as a multifamily zone. Your front yard needs to be 10 feet no matter what. Your lot coverage, you can only build 55% of your lot, right? If you have a 1,000 square foot lot, only 55% of it can actually be covered by building. We deal with FARs a lot. That stands for floor area ratio. A little bit difficult to kind of demonstrate without actual illustration. If I was smart, I would have put this in the presentation, but happy to answer questions in the future. But basically, that's your floor area ratio. A good way to think about FAR is it's 1.25 here. That means that you could, in theory, cover your entire lot with a building that is 1.25 times the lot area. Anyway, I shouldn't have gone into that because it gets too confusing, but it also has your required parking and all this kind of stuff. Here's R5 districts that are found throughout the borough. You can see that there are quite a few of them here in CB14. And I mean, they're all over Brooklyn, especially South Brooklyn and East Brooklyn. There's a lot found in East New York as well as all around in Queens. And so it's, this is one of those districts that's important to know a little bit about because they're found all over. Here's the different district that is found a lot in CB14. You can see on the left side where it's found. And this is what's called a contextual district. I'm not even going to go into how to read the zoning code that much yet. I'll get into that in a minute. But any district that has a letter at the end, either an A, a B, a D, an X, that is what's called a contextual district. And those were introduced well after 1961. And they have different rules that actually respond to the neighborhood. They'll have rules that say you need to match your next door neighbor's front yard in certain cases, or they'll have different rules about what kind of buildings you can have. They're contextual for a reason, that they're meant to fit into and respond to the context, not necessarily be equal to the context, but respond to the context. So you can see some of the regulations down below here, for instance. In R3, lower than R5, usually the number, if it's lower, means it's a lower density district. So you can see that you're actually required to have side yards here. So this is a detached district, right? And if you look on Google Maps, you can even see from above, from like an aerial view, that these are the more low density districts in CD14. R7A, here's just another example, and I'm running through them. You can see here at the top that these are typically found in major corridors. Coney Island Ave has a fair amount of R7A. Ocean Ave a little bit, but Ocean Ave has kind of its own stuff. And then at the northern part of CD14, as we get closer to Prospect Park and Prospect Leopard's Gardens, where things get a little bit more dense around Flatbush, you'll have a lot of R7A. Again, the number is a little bit higher. It's still a contextual district, but the number being higher indicates it's usually a higher density district. So the FAR compared to the 1.25 of R5 earlier is now 4.6 for inclusionary housing. MIH is a different issue I can get into later. And you'll see here at the top that the shaded buildings, the dark buildings in this illustration are intended to kind of show what is probably already there, the existing built form. And the white buildings, as well as these envelopes at the edge, show what could be built. As you see here, some of the buildings that could be built, yes, they're a little bit taller than the existing buildings there. But again, that's okay. The idea of zoning and zoning as a part of planning is not necessarily for the neighborhoods to, match exactly what's already there, but to respond to the context and make sure that they respond adequately and in a way that keeps neighborhoods having the character that they are, while still allowing appropriate development. C44D, so commercial districts are a little bit different. As you could tell from the C compared to R, commercial as opposed to residential. They're usually designed for more commercial places, but to make things more confusing, commercial districts still allow quite a bit of residential development. They're just a little bit more flexible when it comes to the actual use part of using space. So the FARs for commercial development is actually a little bit higher. But they all also have equivalent residential districts. So if you build a residential building within a commercial district, that is allowed, but every commercial district has an equivalent that's in the zoning code, and you can see it very clearly. Went too far. It's in the zoning code, and basically all you got to do is go to that equivalent zone, and that'll tell you what can be built. Contextual zoning, I talked about this a little bit earlier, requires new development to reflect the scale and the character of the existing neighborhood, right? So on the left here, we can see Flatbush area with R7As, kind of, which were shown what here, right? So you can see kind of the development that's shown in this top image, and it makes a lot of sense as what we see on the left here. New development needs to respond and reflect the scale and the character. And on the right side, R3X, which we talked about earlier, a much more low density district with detached homes, mostly single family homes, although you can allow some multifamily to a limited extent. Those contextual zoning districts have to respond to the scale and the character, and that's written into the code and how they have to do that. So going into reading these things, residential districts R1 through R10, commercial C1 through C8, and manufacturing districts are M1 through M3. If only it were as simple as that, but obviously we need to make things more complicated. So we have suffixes like we have here in the C47 example. We have contextual districts which have the letter suffixes at the end of an R district, or even sometimes a C district. So the first one indicates the use. But of course, like I said earlier, it's not that simple. Commercial districts often allow residential use. Residential districts can have overlays of commercial, which allow limited commercial use that's more intended to serve the local, neighborhood. And even manufacturing uses or manufacturing zoning sometimes allow things that we think of as more commercial. So it does get a little bit different. Generally, and I'm saying generally because obviously, as we'll see in this image in a minute in the bottom right, it's not always the case. The higher the number, the more, they say the word intensity, I don't really understand that, but a bit more dense, right? So when you get to Manhattan, you can usually find, the higher R9, R8, R9, R10 districts. Whereas when you get a little bit to the outer boroughs, when you get to Queens, to Staten Island, especially up to North Bronx and South Brooklyn, you'll see some lower numbers like we see a little bit in CD14 with, R3 is a little bit lower density district. Generally, the suffix here, which you'll see with commercial districts, you see they're a little bit in residential districts, but they're being phased out. Sometimes they'll have a suffix like here in C47. The higher the number typically means the lower the parking requirement. But obviously parking is in flux right now politically. I'm not sure how many of you saw, but borough president, as well as a couple of city council members, are now lobbying to modify or totally get rid of, minimum parking requirements. But that's how things stand right now. Is that usually the higher number in the suffix indicates, again, more density, and you have lower parking requirements. Here on the bottom right, you can see some commercial. Things get a little bit complicated because I know it's so hard to see. It's so tiny. We squeeze so much on the slide, but C3 districts kind of stand out in that they're generally waterfront districts. So you can see that little boat there. C7 districts are almost completely reserved for Coney Island area, which is why you see kind of amusement parks. And C8s are usually about automotive uses. So on big automotive thoroughfares where you see a lot of gas stations and stuff like that, those are C8s. So that's how we kind of mess with the intensity number over here a little bit. You're not going to find a whole lot of C7 or C8, and even in Manhattan, even though they're, in general should be the higher density districts, they're not. They just kind of stand out as aberrations. Here's a good overview of some of the residential districts. And again, we modify this stuff all the time. There's, R7-2s, there's R5As, there's R8Bs, there's all kinds of different stuff that modifies things generally. But the non-contextual districts, which, still have their own rules to them, but they don't necessarily need to respond to the scale and the character of existing neighborhoods as much. This is a good overview of kind of what you can expect to see. So again, a lot of R3 in CB14. We see a significant amount of R3 as we've seen in the previous slide. And this probably makes sense, right? And just in Ditmas Park, we'll see some R3. There's also some R2 in Midwood, right? And this is probably a lot of the development. You'll see 2, maybe 3, 2.5, 2 with an attic. story developments. As we get bigger to R5 and R6, R6 is a little bit closer to what you'll see in northern neighborhoods in Brooklyn as we get closer to Manhattan. A lot of Bed-Stuy is R6. A lot of, Fort Greene, Clinton Hill, a lot of R6B specifically, but I, won't get too into that. Then we get into the R8s, R9s, R10s, which are, downtown Brooklyn and found more in Manhattan and other, more dense areas. Flushing, for example, as well. Other centers of dense centers. Again, this just blows up the commercial a little bit more. This is also a little bit confusing, and I know it can be because there can be C1 districts that actually you can develop some pretty big buildings. So it does get a little bit confusing with the commercial districts. A lot of times we will think about what makes more sense for an area, residential districts with a commercial overlay, or just a commercial district that has a residential equivalent similar to the bulk that we'd like to see. But this gives a general overview. And again, the C3s, C7s, and C8s kind of really stand out because they don't really conform to what we typically see of the numbers getting higher and the intensity getting greater. Manufacturing, I'm not going to spend too much time on. We don't have a ton of that in CD14, but of course, happy to answer more questions. There's MXs, which are mixed, right? And so we see that in Dumbo, in which residential is lightly allowed, not really, but it's less of the traditional industrial that we're seeing, or that you may think of when you think of industrial districts of, smokestacks, stuff like that. Same thing with M1s and even some N2s. Usually they bridge kind of differences between higher, more heavy-duty industrial districts and maybe some, more residential areas. So you may pass them by and they don't really seem industrial, but that's what we have. And then M2s and M3s are the more traditional industrial manufacturing zonings. So, like I said earlier, we do engage in rezonings. The private, actors can engage and apply for their own rezonings sometimes, and we'll process those. And then that goes into ULURP. Or the city will sometimes be the applicant, as we've seen very recently in Gowanus and Soho NoHo. The city was actually the applicant, but we still need to follow the exact same public review process that any private development needs to follow. So Williamsburg in 2007, and this is, I think, almost the same view in 2018. Obviously, huge rezoning in Williamsburg about 10, 15 years ago. 2 rezonings, actually. And basically, the city had a sort of vision. It was modified over the ULURP process, and is still being, modified today to kind of shape what that part of the borough could be and what it should be in the context of the city as a whole. Here's Bed-Stuy. Bed-Stuy in 2011, and there was 2 Bed-Stuy rezonings, Bed-Stuy North and Bed-Stuy South. And here we see in 2018, this is almost exactly the same view, right? These 2 buildings with a gap between them are basically this one on the left, which was kind of refurbished a little bit, obviously, modernized, and this one on the right. And here you can see that it went from R5 to R6B. The number got higher, right? So it's a little bit more intense, a little bit more density. And it's also now a contextual district, right, with B. So you can see the new buildings here are actually taller than the existing buildings, but they still fit into the context, right? We're not seeing major skyscrapers here. You're seeing the setbacks from the front. It's a little bit hard to see here, but you can see the front yards, the front setbacks within the private property are similar. And so it allowed for a little bit additional development while still maintaining the context and the nature of the districts. And that's the intention of the contextual districts, the ones with letter suffixes at the end. MIH, we could go on and 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 on about MIH, but this was enacted by Mayor de Blasio. It used to have voluntary, now it's mandatory. Basically, whenever the city, whenever any applicant, whether it be a public or a private applicant, rezones a certain area up above a certain district, usually to an R6, I want to say, or an R5 or above, they have to enact a number of options, or sometimes just one option, sometimes more, that ensure that a certain percentage is made affordable. And affordability obviously can take many forms. The calculations we use here is AMI, or area median income, which actually encompasses not just the borough or the city, but the whole New York kind of metro area. And so they'll look at what the AMI is and what they can charge for those units. And as a result, you get to build a little bit higher to kind of allow the property owner to make up the difference that he or she would not be getting because it's a lower district. I'm going to just hold it here for a minute so y'all can read, but obviously happy to go more into that. This could be a whole presentation unto itself, obviously. Some tools. This is very important. Zola, if you're interested in development in your neighborhood, in the city, period. Zola is the place you're going to want to go. It is fantastic. I'm happy to do like, you know, a different presentation on this sometimes. The address is right here. I can post it in the chat. It's really good about learning which zoning district you're in, which zoning district your neighbors are in, so you can see if, you know, what's on the edge there. I mean, this snapshot on the right basically shows the whole city, and it kind of makes sense, right? The lighter yellow indicates a lower density residential district, which is why we see it over here in kind of outer Brooklyn and closer to Queens. M indicates manufacturing districts. So a lot of these are found here on the east side of Greenpoint and Williamsburg, and a little bit up here as well in Long Island City, as well as in meatpacking, right, district, and kind of on the west side of Manhattan. And then the reds indicate the C districts. So you still see a fair amount of yellow in Manhattan, but this yellow is actually, it's hard to see from this image, but it's actually darker yellow. That indicates it's probably more of this R7, R8, R9, R10s all around Manhattan, which indicate they're still residential neighborhoods primarily, but you know, they are higher density residential neighborhoods. So you can go there, you can type in your address. 16 Court Street is the address of the Brooklyn office. It's where I go to work every day. And on the left side, you can scroll, you could toggle between the zoning districts. You could see, you know, when I type that in, it brings up this thing on the side, on the right side. It shows me what zoning district I'm in. I'm in a C52A zoning district. The DB indicates a special district. I'm not going to get too much into that. And there's also these really fascinating things here. There's zoning details. You can go into historical zoning maps to see when it was zoned this way, what's changed since 1961. You could look and see whether it's in a transit zone or an historic district. And if you click on these, you'll go to a DCP website that explains what a transit zone is, what an historic district is. If you go down, BizWeb shows you building information that's not really, you know, DCP's area, but the Department of Building will publish some of its information, property records, all kind of stuff. And if you scroll down further, neighborhood information, you'll be able to see what community district you're in. Obviously, we're all in 14. You can see the city council district you're in. And so this is really where you're going to want to go. On the left side also, there's a lot of other things. You could see zoning map amendments that have been passed throughout the years. You could see pending zoning map amendments in your neighborhood or anywhere else in the city. Sub-districts, transit zones, fresh zones, sidewalk cafes. There's a lot of information on Zola. And that's about it. I know I ran through that very quickly. It covered about 1.5 million things. I went about an inch deep and a mile long wide, but I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all may have.
Thank you for that, David. I love that you're so passionate about planning.
I have a tendency to
Like
be
you.
verbose, so I'll shut up for a minute.
Really
So
should, Sean, while you're reviewing the hands that are up, could I just quickly also thank David, because he's been great about being in touch with the office and just really jumped in with both feet and has been helpful. So thank you for that. And I know it's on your list, but I just want to make sure we recognize Anthony Drummond from Councilmember Farrah Lewis's office, who's with us tonight.
yep. Thanks for being here. So I guess we'll take some questions now. Liz, I see your hand is up.
Hi, my name is Liz Denny, and I'm a echo somewhere. Anyway, I'm a resident of CB14, and you mentioned that zoning exists to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of all users of a city, yet NYC zoning continues to have mandatory parking minimums, and requiring additional parking spots increases the number of private vehicles on the road. Instead of encouraging residents to use public or active transit options, it leads to an increase in pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, and reckless driving is rampant, especially across our district, where there's a particularly high number of severe injuries and fatalities for vulnerable road users. And mandatory parking minimums also increase the overall cost of development and pass on those extra housing costs to residents of those buildings, and just increase housing costs overall across their neighborhoods. And so this further burdens New Yorkers, particularly during a pandemic and a housing shortage. And it all feels very contrary to me to protecting the goals of protecting public health, safety, and welfare. Can you speak more about how the zoning office is looking into, reevaluating mandatory parking minimums so that they don't go counter to these goals? Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate that, Liz. These parking requirements, as well as many of the other requirements we had, were put in place in 1961. We've learned a lot since then, right? The city is not the same as it was since 1961, and people's definitions of public safety, health, and welfare are not the same as what they were in 1961, right? And so that's why we've seen a lot of council members and a lot of planners in the private, public, and nonprofit sector call for exactly the kind of things that you are bringing up today. And so I appreciate that. DCP, we propose modifications a lot of times. Oftentimes we find pushback from certain members of communities or certain different groups. So DCP hasn't, to my understanding, made an aggressive push to remove the parking minimums, but we know that council members have, and I would be, I speak on behalf of DCP here, and we, haven't responded because there's no actual legislation on the floor just yet, but I expect there will be soon, and I would be pretty surprised if something pretty significantly didn't occur in modifying some of these parking requirements. We're made up of planners at DCP who care deeply about kind of the things that you just brought up. And, I can't speak for everybody, but we understand and we acknowledge a lot of the research that has shown just what you just brought up about parking minimums and what they do encourage. And so I wouldn't be surprised if DCP staff, or I would be surprised very much if DCP staff presented itself as kind of a barrier to modifying parking requirements to actually better serve neighborhoods in terms of housing costs, reducing pollution, and reducing fatalities. So I appreciate that.
Thank you again, Liz. Greg, you have a question?
Yes, thank you. David, again, thanks for the presentation this evening, and we look forward to working with you moving forward. Just sort of in that spirit, I'm just sort of wondering, sort of two related things. So first, in terms of, sort of keeping the board aware of what's coming down the line. What's the typical process there, and how early is it feasible for the board to be advised of new projects that are being considered in the district, and applications that we might see and might come before us for recommendation? Is there a I know there's a process that usually goes through Sean. Is there some way that we could I guess have more of a heads up, let's say, in terms of when applications are on the horizon, when they're filed, even to sort of keep track of things in the district?
Yeah, I appreciate that. Now, this is again a good example to differentiate between as of right development and development that's not as of right, right? And so, Greg, I'm assuming that you're referring to the latter, right?
Correct.
Because again, just want to reiterate, for the theory of zoning, you may see a lot of development in your neighborhood and say, well, I didn't know about this. There was no public hearing or something. The theory of zoning, again, just in theory, basically says, well, we've said in this area that's okay to have, because the public input comes when we're rezoning. For a specific development or a private actor that is rezoning something, I'll say what the standard is, and then I'll basically say how I intend to operate as a planner. The standard is that really there's no obligation for public review until what we call certification. Certification begins and occurs at what is known as a review session. These are all remote, but they're all publicly viewable. They're streamed live on YouTube, so you can see them in real time. Those are not public hearings. Those are simply kind of conversations between the Department of City Planning staff and the city planning commissioners themselves. And nothing is approved or disapproved. Basically, all it means at that point is that the application is complete. What makes an application complete means that we've reviewed it and said that it doesn't mean that we are recommending approval of it or not even or recommending denial of it. Any applicant can bring any project, whether DCP staff or commissioners agree or disagree with it. But basically it means we've reviewed it. We've also completed our environmental review for seeker, the city environmental quality review process. And the intention of that is basically what happens on the back end is kind of formulating the project and reviewing it to make sure that it meets certain requirements. So if it does get approved and the community is in favor of it and the planning commission, the city council does actually support it, we've already kind of done that technical work, right, already at the beginning. That's the standard. Is at certification, everybody will know. You'll get a formal notification. Of course, you could, watch the certification itself.
Now,
I'm simply operating as. Oh, sorry about that.
Oh, I'm sorry. So, is there a way to independently, perhaps keep track? I know you have the zoning application portal, but it's not always easy to navigate or to narrow down to a community district.
Yeah.
I mean, are there other tools for us to kind of keep informed on things that are in the hopper?
Formally, not to my knowledge, but informally, what I'll get to is basically, I plan to operate in a way where I don't really see a problem with notifying communities a little bit earlier than that something is coming.
Okay.
Just to give a little bit of background, the theory behind kind of not making things public early is not that we're trying to operate behind some shadow. It's that a lot of times, a lot of changes happen in a project, in that phase. In response to the environmental review, in response to kind of whatever's going on, the property owner's life or whatever. And so we don't want to necessarily publicize a project by the time it actually gets to review sessions totally different, because that can confuse a couple of things. Nonetheless, I mean, I plan to operate. Sean and I have had a lot of conversations, and I plan to get more involved and be a resource to this community, where I have absolutely no problem of giving y'all a call and just letting you know, hey, here's the address. We have a project going down. I don't know what the details of it are yet, because a lot of times it's still pretty early, but that's the way that I plan to operate, purely on an informal process.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah, so I'll just say that, and you could take my word for it there. A lot of the details I won't know, not because I'm trying to keep them secret, but because we literally just don't know them yet, because they're still in formation. But at least by the time it gets a certification, that this property, or it's almost rarely a single property that's a spot zoning thing.
Mm-hmm.
Land use law is fascinating, but it's a series of properties or an area that is being identified. And if it's a city application, like we saw in Gowanus and Soho NoHo, usually the ULURP process doesn't start until there's been years and years and years of hearings anyway.
Right.
So usually it's private applications. But yes, I plan to at least let y'all know there's something coming down the pike earlier.
Okay, fantastic. And then on the as of right side, so more recently we've had a couple of instances where we had questions about projects that appear to be as of right, but either we have questions about it or it's just a little gray as to how they were interpreted as of right. Is there also a way to sort of keep tabs on, obviously there'll be more applications than there would be on the ULURP side, but is there a way that using the data that's available to sort of keep track on tabs on things that are going on an as of right side, on the as of right side within the district?
Yeah, absolutely. That's not what Zola is for necessarily, the website I just showed. But I know there's DOB websites. Here I'm showing my naivety. Sean or Anthony, you may actually know. I know I've been on the websites before, but they should show in real time the applications for building permits that are going on. Let me check in the office tomorrow, and then I'd be happy to send an email to the board. But I'm about 80–90% sure that I see the applications coming in for as of right development.
Oh, they definitely do. I was just wondering if there was some way to aside from on a property by property basis to kind of to kind of look at it more holistically to see, there are 50 applications that are going on in the district or anything like that. Is there anything, I mean, this might be more DOB, but just to have sort of accounting of what's going on in the district overall.
Yeah, good question. I actually am not sure right now, but be happy to check on that and get back to you. I mean, we at city planning, I'm in the Brooklyn office. Obviously, every borough has an office, but we also have a lot of folks that are just kind of doing research all day. We do look backs at previous, land use actions. We look at neighborhoods holistically, and kind of what's happened in recent years, and we look at trends. And so I'm sure that we tend to publish a lot of studies on and things like that aren't actually land use actions. They're just studies to publish, just so we have a better understanding of our city. So I'm not sure is the correct answer, but I'll definitely do some research within the department and get back to you.
That'd be great. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Of course.
I know, Greg, I know we've seen numbers that show us the increase from year to year in terms of the number of DOB building permits. And I shared that, I think, with you, David, and I'll post it on our website under projects. Hopefully we can do that tomorrow if I can find it. But the number in 2018, we had double digits, in low double digits, 20-30 permits for new dwellings. And then by 2020, it was up to hundreds. And so I've expressed this to a few of you. The reason why we feel like there's a building popping up everywhere is because there is. It was a huge increase just within our little 2.9 square miles. So we'll get those numbers up. But to Craig's question, yeah, it'd be really interesting to see sort of the preview of coming attractions instead of that retro perspective. We'll figure that out together.
Yeah, I'm going to look into that tomorrow. I appreciate it, Greg.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions that anybody had for David? Sean?
Yeah, I'm going to actually properly raise my hand this time. First of all, Joelle Dessous from Rita Joseph office is also on this call. So thank you for your time, Joelle. My question to David is about, you mentioned Sorry, you mentioned that there could be residential building in a commercial district, but did you touch on commercial overlays in residential district and how they get born?
No, I didn't. I'd be happy to do so. I have that as an appendix slide. I promise I won't take much more of your time, but I can share real quick. Because we do have a couple of overlays. Promise it won't take too long. Let me see where I've got them. I swear they were somewhere in here. Oh, maybe I didn't put them in here. I guess not. I apologize. I thought I had them, but I can talk about them briefly. Let me see. You can stop sharing. Yeah, so we tend to find commercial overlay districts, and you'll find these on Zola as well. This is where things get a little bit murky and there's some gray area. There's residential districts, there's commercial districts, there's manufacturing, right? Those are the three main ones. But oftentimes in residential districts, we have C1 overlays or C2 residential overlays, which means that, yes, this is primarily a residential district. However, the commercial overlays allow limited commercial use, usually at the ground floor, right? And a lot of times we'll see these on not really major automotive corridors, although sometimes we'll see those, but on major shopping districts, your commercial strips or whatever, that you may walk down them and see them very busy and say, oh, this must be a commercial district. But a lot of times they're actually residential districts with commercial overlays. The difference being that we still don't intend for these to be buildings where we want to see like office buildings, right? These are usually the districts where we'll have commercial uses on the first, rarely the second floor, but usually just on the first floor, and then residential uses above, right? And so we do have those commercial districts. I'm happy to get into that in a little bit more detail. But I'm trying to think, I mean, they're all over the city. And you'll see them on Zola, where you'll see kind of a yellow district indicating it's residential, and you'll see kind of red boxes around certain properties or certain blocks. And that's where you know it's a commercial district. And as you zoom into Zola, you'll say, oh, that makes sense. That's, I think of that as a main, local shopping drag. And it's intended not for, downtown areas where we have big office buildings. We still want it to be primarily residential in nature, but introduce commercial uses to keep the corridors active. And usually, not always, but usually those commercial uses, we have FAR requirements for commercial and requirements that it be below the residential units to encourage an active storefronts. And so a lot of times they're, basically intended to serve the needs of the local community rather than some, destination district for people all over the city or the metro area. And I'm happy to go into that in more detail later on. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Anne, did you want to ask the question that you just put in the chat?
Yes, I did. Thank you very much for the presentation, David. It's very informative. So I just put in the chat the following, for these commercial overlays off of an avenue, a commercial avenue, does that change the street side's use to commercial, specifically school buses and other C plates are allowed to park on that residential side? Thank you.
Oh, that's a little bit outside of my area of expertise. I'd be more than happy to look into that. When it gets to the commercial vehicles and kind of what's permitted where, I'm not exactly sure, but I'd be happy to do a little bit of research and get back to you about that.
Thank you. That would help.
Yeah,
Appreciate
not a
it.
problem.
Does anybody else have any other questions that they want to ask David? No, not right now. Well, I have one question that I wanted to ask you. Just a little bit, I guess, a clarification about the process. Like at the end of the certification and when an application goes through that entire process, does DCP actually give an approval, or do you just kick it over to DOB and DOB gives an approval on the project? Like, can you give a little bit of a clarification of that?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a ULURP right there, our most fun thing to say. Certification, it's actually kind of funny. I used to work for the San Francisco Planning Department. We didn't have the same kind of process, and it's kind of fascinating to see how different cities kind of do different things. But basically, it looks like a public hearing. It sounds like a public hearing. You can log on to the review session, but there's no public. Basically, what it is publicizing in real time a conversation between DCP staff and the commissioners. So basically, they can ask questions about the application as it's certified. And then at the end of the process, they don't vote on it. The chair will simply say, okay, it's certified. A lot of times you'll even see that the questions they ask to either, to the DCP staff member who's been in charge of the certification, sometimes they'll ask me questions and I'll say, I don't know. You'll have to ask the applicant in 5 months when it comes back. So they'll have questions and we'll say, I don't know. And the commissioners will have to accept that. But at least they know, the public knows because it's all public, and the applicant knows that that's something that the commission cares very deeply about. This is even before the ULURP process. I could talk for hours and hours about ULURP, but basically ULURP is the public review portion. So certification doesn't mean any approval. It doesn't mean any disapproval. It doesn't even mean that staff is recommending approval or disapproval. All it means is that the application is complete and is going to begin public review, first to the community board, then to the borough president, then to the city planning commission, and then if the planning commission approves it, then to the city council. That's 4 steps, all of which by law are required to have public hearings. So the public has opportunity to weigh in, not just once, not just twice, not just 3 times, but 4 times in public hearings. And I mean, it's all public throughout that, right? And sometimes applications can change during that process. That's the whole point that we have this. And sometimes, MIH options can change and whatever. But no, certification is not approval or denial. It's just saying, here's the application. End of story. When it comes back after ULURP is done, because there are some time limits on everyone in ULURP, that's when the votes actually occur, but not until there's been at least, depending on how the community board is set up, and depending on the controversy of the application, at least 3 public hearings by the time it gets back to the planning commission.
All right. Thank you for answering that.
Sorry,
Oh,
and I want to
go ahead.
clarify, just because you asked on DOB, all we're doing in this whole process is actually just redrawing a map, right? So as you all know, they'll come to you and they'll say, hey, here's what we're planning to do. You know, we're going to build this many, there's going to be this many units, that many units, you know, whatever. When we approve or disapprove something, let's say we approve an application for rezoning, all we're really doing is changing a map, right? Then the applicant needs to actually apply for the building permit, and then it's in DOB's territory. They don't necessarily need to build exactly what they presented to you. However, it's in their best interest, because if they lie to the community board and the community members, the next time they come back, you will rightly say, why should we trust you? You just lied to us in the last application. So really all we do is change a map. DOB is the one that's enforcing the actual changes that were made during ULURP. And so that comes way after. It's also very possible someone could rezone a property or an area and then, God forbid, lose all their money and then not actually develop it, you know? All we're really doing is changing the map. And so planning is concerned less about the specific development and more about the use in the space that's allowed there. That's really what we're approving.
Okay, thank you. Anne, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, thank you very much. So I was wondering, what are the conditions under which PSA would review a non-as-of-right project? I know one of them is that it can't be self-imposed, but I don't recall what the other conditions are. Do you happen to know? Can you shed some light on that, please?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't have the specific conditions off the top of my head. They're obviously written down, and I'd be happy to copy them and send them to Sean. She could, you know, publicize them. But they're actually, this is one of the fascinating things about land use laws. They're actually pretty consistent from city to city. And so typically those are for hardships, right? A lot of times that means I own a property that is so weirdly shaped, or it is weirdly sloped. Again, I work in San Francisco, where the city is, you know, like this. And so a lot of people on slope properties would say, hey, if I actually follow the rules to a T, I wouldn't be able to build anything that all my neighbors could build. So basically it's saying all my neighbors with normal properties can do this, and I can't do this because of a hardship that I didn't create, right? And so that's what you brought up. However, there's more to it. It also needs to make sure that it's not going to have a significant negative impact on other community members and other neighboring properties, renters, owners, etc. And so it's both, it looks at it from both ways, both from just the owner's point of view of, do they have a legitimate hardship that they didn't create, that they're kind of just, you know, drew the short straw because of a weird property situation, A, and B, if we approve this, will the impact be a significant detriment on other folks? Again, DCP doesn't actually handle the variance process, that's BSA, but that's the gist of it, just to give an overview. And again, I'd be more than happy to get the actual language.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your question, Anne. So seeing no other hands, I guess we can thank David for one last time. Thank you very much for a wonderful presentation and for all the
Thanks so much, David.
Thanks so much, David.
No problem. Again, really happy to be here. I'm under no illusion that I know CV14 or even the city as a whole, as well as all of you do, but I look forward to attending more meetings and getting to know the neighborhood to better serve you. I'm going to put my email address in the chat here. Email me anytime about land use issues or non-land use issues, just to chat. Happy to do it.
Thank you, David. I don't think you're getting away from us that easy, so.
Oh, no.
I think he has a heads up on that from our conversations.
I would never dream of it. I wouldn't dream of it.
Okay, well, I guess we can just discuss some things about the committee. Thank you again, David, for being here. Have a great night. And Greg and I wanted to just talk to the committee members that are present tonight about what we have planned, and to get some input from everybody here, about some planning that we're doing. This is a new committee within CB14, so we want to make it really good. And I did see that Barden put in the chat that maybe there's something that we can work together with the transportation committee. Was that what I saw in the chat? So anyway, so we hope you really enjoyed this presentation tonight. We hope to offer more in the coming months. Presentations like this that offer more information, and insight into how we can better work with city agencies in order to get the community the information that is crucial to how we live. Some of the other things that we wanted to talk about in upcoming sessions are talking about affordable housing. Obviously, homeless shelters, has been, especially the one on Kenilworth, has been a big topic. We'd like to talk about sustainability, especially with the upcoming changes in some code things like LL 97, and not using gas usage in buildings, things like that. So we do want to get into more solar panels, facades, things like that have to do with sustainability, accessible dwelling units. We definitely want to get into that. I know that finding a new home for the 70th precinct is something that maybe there is another committee that is sort of dealing with that, but we definitely would like to be a part of that. The development of African burial.
Oh, we may have lost her there. Talisha, can you
I
hear
want to
us?
say, was I the only one who lost Talisha? Or no?
I think that might be it. Well, while she's getting back online, yeah, I think just to echo Talisha while she's getting back online there. I think we're looking for ways to obviously wrestle with these sort of bigger picture questions, but also to sort of help us and inform the board in future applications that are going to be coming before us to help us ask the critical questions when public hearings take place, and just to offer that for the overall board to assist with that process as well. So I see actually a few questions or a few hands up. So Sean, I guess you're at the top there, so please go ahead.
Yeah, just to quickly kind of, I think when we talked about this during the bylaws revision, there was this idea that the board would position itself to be knowledgeable when it had to react to applications and build a foundation upon which the board can be proactive in land use, which is some of the stuff that Talisha was sort of naming off in terms of sustainability. So I might suggest that people review the Lunch and Learn videos, and maybe that gives a jumping off point for some of the stuff we can learn. But I also just want to say this out loud because we do have representatives from elected officials' offices. This is the board's board taking matters into its own hands to gain this knowledge, because after the last charter revision and some proposals from elected officials, we were supposed to have a planning person assigned to each board, and we don't. And our board members were supposed to be trained more completely by DCP, and they haven't been. So I'm really pleased to be working with a board that's taking this initiative, and to the extent that it can be scaled up to other boards, that's great. But I feel like, it's going to kind of circle back to us needing resources going forward. So just on record with that, sort of a prelude to a request for more resources. And also an applause to my board members who've been really terrific about being smart about all of this.
Thank you, Sean. Actually, I see Joanne, you've raised your hand. If you'd like to say something as well, just sort of.
Yeah. Thank you, Co-Chair Alvarez. Thank you, Co-Chair Sandville. This has been a really great meeting. I just want to bring up two new items that are coming across through the Department of Buildings, which may affect particularly the more dense areas of our district. The first is self-certification of elevator inspection. That might be something that we can ask for a presentation. Typically, the Department of Buildings has been sending out personnel to inspect elevators, but now it is on the property owner or the co-op or the condo to hire someone to do a third-party inspection and then report back to the city. That's one item that's of an interest. And then also, because of a collapse of a sub-ground level garage, now we will be transitioning into 5 or 6 year yearly, let's say a 5-year inspection of subterranean parking garages, which mainly affects buildings that were built when accessory parking was required. And now we will have to hire a third party to do an inspection, then report back to the Department of Buildings. So just two items to keep on your radar. Not really a big deal, but very, very new. Thanks.
Thank you. And I see Talisha's back on, so welcome back. I think you were dropped off there for a second, so I'll let you wrap up for us here. I see Glenn has a question as well.
You just call on me, Glenn? All right. I just like to, a couple of things. One is that I'd like to remind people that I think it's 1610 Coney Island Cortelli Road. While that was being discussed, there's a significant segment of the population in that area that were very concerned about loss of parking. And now we've got the possibility of these restaurant add-ons, I don't know what else to call them, that are out in the street taking away parking. So the idea that they may not require new buildings to include parking, I find that as a representative of this section of the community a bit distressing. I also have a question. This new person seems very nice, but do we know what happened to Jonah Rogoff or David Paresh or Winston Van Engel, the people that we have worked with in the past? Sean, do you know?
David, go ahead.
Yeah, Jonah's still in the office. He's actually been elevated to a higher position, so he's actually senior to me now. So he's already given me a ton of knowledge on CB14. Winston Von Engel is still the director of the office, the Brooklyn office. David Paresh is still in the central office. So none of those folks have left, and I'm continuing to rely on Jonah and Winston for their expertise.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Talisha, just since you were cut off, is there anything else we should talk about before we wrap up for the evening? Just to give things for the committee members to think about, moving forward.
I don't think so, especially not knowing what happened in the couple of minutes that I was gone. But just as I was making my big debut, but I think that anything else we can bring it up, I guess, at the next meeting. But I want to thank everybody for being here tonight, and I hope that you enjoyed the presentation and that you're looking forward to having more things like this and more information like this to be distributed throughout the community board. And that's about it.
Okay, then I guess at this point we can wrap up, unless Sean, there's anything else we need to hit before we conclude.
Just a reminder that this is being recorded and it will be up on the website. So Talisha, you can review and make sure we didn't say anything about you while you were gone. And then in some of those things that you mentioned would be joint committees. We can certainly work with the other committees that would have interest in some of the topics like the precinct house and hold those meetings jointly. But there certainly is a lot on the plate, and I'm looking forward to it all.
And thank you for all the work that you did in helping us get this together, Sean. Really appreciate it.
Indeed. All right, well then that's it for now. Good night, everybody, and we'll reconvene soon.
Good night.
Yep.
Thank you all. Great.
Good night.
All right, thank you.
Good night.
It'll all be well.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone.